Happy Thanksgiving, y'all. I appreciate you being here. Go ahead, smash that like button, share this out with your friends. We're going to do a little bit different of a show today. It's going to be a little bit different. I do this every year. I share with you the true meaning of Thanksgiving and the true story, really, of Thanksgiving, because I feel like whether we realize it or not, we kind of have this image in our heads of the first Thanksgiving, and it's kind of like cartoonish. Okay. It was something that we were taught in grade school, and it's just not factual or true. And this is one of those shows where I say archive it, save it, share it with your kids around the breakfast table this morning. So hit the subscribe button and always support the program by visiting patriotpumpenergy.com and buying your bottle of premium pre-workout today. This is our fruit punch flavor. Absolutely delicious. And it's got 150 milligrams of caffeine in it. That is substantially less than your energy drinks. No sugar. It's really good stuff. All right, let's dig into today's show. So let's go back to the autumn of 1621. I will paint a picture for you in your head. There was a group of buckle-shoed pilgrims. Okay. They're very friendly, and they are perceived to be very friendly with the Indians. Okay. You think that this is a very friendly relationship, that they and the Indians, the pilgrims and the Indians, feasted together, and they had a successful autumn harvest. And, you know, they were heralding their new friendship, and a new friendship between two peoples. Well, that's not the truth, the actual truth of Thanksgiving. That is an image that has been baked into your skull since 5th grade. The actual history of the first Thanksgiving is nothing like the grade school story, and it is far more interesting and complex. So let's dig into the story of the Pilgrims first, shall we? So to do this, we have to go back to the early part of the 17th century. So the Church of England was under King James I, and he was persecuting anyone, killing people, hurting people, anyone who did not recognize the church's absolute civil and spiritual authority. Okay. And at that time, the church was the state. Okay. Those who challenged the church's authority, they would be hunted down and killed at the direction of the Church of England king, King James I. So there were people, separatists, who believed strongly in freedom of worship. They didn't want to be hunted down and imprisoned anymore. This was in the 1600s in England. Okay. And they didn't want to be executed for their beliefs and for their biblical interpretation. They didn't want to be subject to the priests or the spiritual figures of this church, big church, big C church. Okay. The church, the body of Christ, this was different. This was political. It was the state. Okay. Essentially the government in the 1600s. Okay. And they didn't want any part of this, the separatists. So what they did, they first fled to Holland. Okay. And these were just separatists who liked freely worshiping, liked, you know, not being hunted down and imprisoned for their spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs. And they enjoyed wooden shoes and they liked cheese. Okay. And they established a little community in Holland at first. They were there for about 11 years. Okay. But 40 of these separatists who liked the wooden shoes and cheese, they agreed to go on a perilous journey to the New World. So they had heard about it, and they wanted to go to this exciting new place that was developed. And they knew that they'd face hardships. They knew that it wasn't going to be easy. They were going to face hardship, folks, like you and I have never seen before in our lifetimes. When I say hardships, I mean I can't imagine what these people endured on the Mayflower. We're going to get there. We can't imagine. We are so far advanced right now. I'm sitting here sipping on a cup of coffee, enjoying, the walls of my home. It's warm in here. We could not imagine what they were facing back then. Okay, the hardships. We are far too advanced now. They lived in the 1600s. And if we were to tell them about flight travel, jets, they wouldn't understand what would be happening. Okay, if you could tell them, oh, you don't have to make this treacherous journey, you can just get on a plane and be there in an hour. They would not understand it, and we don't understand the full hardship that really awaited them there once they got to the New World. But above all else, they didn't live for men. They already had proven that they didn't want to live for men. They wanted to live for God. They wanted to worship God according to their convictions and according to the Bible, the Bible. This Church of England, by the way, it was really, hey, don't read the Bible for yourself. Don't have this personal relationship with God. We'll tell you what kind of relationship you can have with God. That is the type of church that they fled from. Okay, so they wanted to worship God according to their own convictions and according to the Bible and live their lives according to the Bible. So they held their faith so dear to them in their hearts that they were willing to go to Holland, leave the church. Now they're willing to go to the New World, and they really were just listening to God because these people were in a personal relationship with God. They heard the word go, and when God tells you to go, you go. Okay. So, their freedom was stripped away from them in England, their religious freedom. And that very freedom that they fought for to get to Holland and strived for and left, to obtain in Holland, they wanted more of that. Okay. That's why they boarded the Mayflower. Now, this is August 1st, 1620. They boarded the Mayflower, and that carried about 102 passengers. Only about 40 of them were separatists. Okay, these people, the Pilgrims, is who I'm talking about. Others were, people, European people, explorers, and things like that. But they boarded the Mayflower, the 40 Pilgrims. And the Pilgrims were specifically led by a guy named William Bradford. Okay, and they launched into the vast unknown. They launched their boat, the vast unknown of the Atlantic. And you have to imagine this. The Mayflower, I think when we were taught in grade school, we've got this image of a gigantic ship. No. Okay, this was a small wooden ship. Okay, and there was this endless ocean, no guarantees, very frightening. Frightening doesn't even really begin to describe this journey. Okay, the Mayflower was only like a 50-foot boat. Okay, it wasn't huge. It was about a 50-foot boat, and 102 souls were going across the Atlantic. And during this perilous voyage, William Bradford, he drafted an agreement, if you will. It's kind of like a contract establishing fair and equal laws. And all 40 of the Pilgrim community, all 40 members of the Pilgrim community, they, signed this, and they were all about the Mayflower contract here. Okay. And the laws applied to everyone equally, regardless of anybody's religious views. And their beliefs did not dictate their rights. So they created something, it's called the Mayflower Compact. This was a contract, and really it was foundational for our founding. Now, this is in the 1600s, but we'll get to the flaws of the Mayflower Compact here in just a second. But a lot of the good to come out of the compact was the scripture. It pulled from scripture, principles drawn straight from scripture. The Pilgrim people were grounded in the teachings of both the Old Testament and the New Testament. and they were thoroughly grounded in those teachings. And that is why Bradford, he penned this Mayflower Compact. He wanted everybody to have equal rights. They did not want to get there and have a Church of England situation again, okay? Because that's what they just fled from. So I think you're starting to get it, that they were a devoutly religious people. They went when God went, and they actually looked to the ancient Israelites. Like I said, Old and New Testament. They looked to the ancient Israelites for their example, because the biblical precedents that were set forth in Scripture, because of the ancient Israelites fleeing slavery, they weren't really hesitant or doubting that their experiment here wouldn't work. Okay, they knew it would work because they were people of deep faith. They never doubted that they were going to get to the New World. Now, people died along the way. They didn't end up with 440, okay, but they never doubted once they got there that they would thrive. The journey was long. It was dangerous. They finally landed here in the New World, New England. Okay, that would be the Northeast today in November. Brr, it's pretty cold today. It's very cold today. And they landed there in New England in November. And according to William Bradford's journal, he talked about how they came upon a cold, barren, desolate wilderness. Okay, so they're kind of shocked once they get there because they've heard of the New World. They thought it was developed by all of these explorers. Christopher Columbus was before this, 1492. This was in the 1600s. They had thought that maybe the land was developed. No, it was very undeveloped, and it was just rocks, a lot of rocks, okay? And it was November, and it was getting colder and colder and colder. No one was there waiting for them to welcome them. There were no friendly faces, no shelter, no nothing, okay? The land was completely barren and unforgiving. There was no inns, no cabins, no roofs, okay, to sleep under. They had the cold ground, and maybe a tree, okay, would provide some shelter from the elements. This was true, brutal hardship that these people faced. And they sacrificed this in the pursuit to freedom and to worship freely and to create their own little community where religious freedom was the bedrock. Okay, was the foundation, religious freedom. So this is only the beginning. Okay, folks. This was their first brutal winter. And remember, they landed in November. So half the colonists died. Okay, half these pilgrims died. Starvation, disease, exposure, and death claimed them, came and claimed their lives. And William Bradford's own wife died. Okay, now we're inching kind of closer to the part where you might be remembering this from grade school. Okay, you might have vaguely heard about the truth. The truth is always much harsher, about how the Pilgrims were having a hard time in the New World. Okay. It wasn't just a change of season. Okay. When spring came, it was the end of a fight for survival. It was so severe, you and I could hardly imagine it. Okay. Eventually, spring did come. Finally, spring came, and that was the end of their fight for survival. Now, in grade school, this is the part where the Indians, the Native Americans, Squanto, right, steps in and they teach the Pilgrims how to live, how to plant corn, how to catch cod, how to find beavers for fur and use them for clothing, the beaver fur. I'm sorry, the animal rights vegans, the crowd is going to come after me, but I'm sorry, that's just a part of history. That's exactly how it happened. Okay. And there was an element to that. That's true. A degree of that, to a certain extent, that is true. The Indians came in, the Native Americans, the brown people. came in and helped the white people. But it's so much more complex than just that. And that is where your history book tends to end. That the Native Americans stepped in, taught them how to live on the land, and they all held hands at a Thanksgiving dinner. Yay, Native Americans. Okay, but it's much more complicated than that. Those stupid white people, right? How the stupid white people didn't know how to live on the land, and the brown people came in and fixed everything. Okay, that's what they teach you in grade school. Most Americans think that the Pilgrims actually stepped off the Mayflower into a peaceful, open, friendly New England, a place with smiling Native Americans who were just super friendly and eager to help them plant corn. That is not true at all. And I highly recommend a book. This is by Charles Mann. It's called 1491. And this is a really good book. And he talks about the world that the Pilgrims arrived in this book. And I'm going to be taking excerpts from it today to try to describe what it was like back then in the 1600s. Because really, the way Charles Mann described it in his book that I've read, he describes it as a political minefield. I mean, this was a place that was savaged by disease before the Europeans even settled, by the way. Okay, the Pilgrims didn't survive because the Native Americans were friendly and taught them how to plant corn. Okay, they survived because there was a three-way power struggle, and there was one man who needed the Pilgrims. Okay, so spring finally came, and the Native Americans were dealing with this brutal winter as well. Okay, so there's like a three-way power struggle here, and I'm going to do my best to explain it. This guy, his name was Massasoit, okay, and he was a military leader of a Native American tribe called the Wampanoag Confederation. Okay, he was a leader, he's a strategist, he's a survivor. He just survived the same brutal winter that the Pilgrims had survived at this time. Okay, so they came out of this brutal winter. Now, 5 years before the Pilgrims had actually arrived, we're dealing with Massasoit in the Wampanoag tribe, and they were crushed by disease. And they weren't living off the land to perfection. Like, they weren't like these amazing agricultural as experts. Okay, the Native Americans were dying from disease, famine, before the Europeans arrived. They knew some hunting tactics, they knew some agricultural practices that came in handy. And we'll get to that here in just a second. But 5 years before the Pilgrims ever landed, this is important, the Wampanoag tribe was crushed by disease. Okay. Now, there were earlier European traders and explorers who we know. Christopher Columbus came a few centuries before the Pilgrims ever arrived. So there were like Spanish settlers, and, I mean, they were bringing all kinds of diseases over, but there were diseases amidst the Native American tribes as well. Okay, they weren't exactly hygienic people. In fact, a lot of these Native American tribes were eating people. Cannibalism, that can't be good for you. They were practicing blood sacrifices, things like that. None of that's really hygienic. I don't know about you, but ripping out somebody's heart for the sun gods doesn't sound exactly clean or like disease-free to me. So anyway, entire villages were emptied. Native Americans and the early European settlers, not the Pilgrims, a lot of people were dying. Okay. There were skeleton towns, one of which, this empty village, it was called Patuxent. Okay. Now, when the Pilgrims arrived on the Mayflower, they renamed Patuxent New Plymouth. Okay. Plymouth Rock, imagine it. the Pilgrims, thought they had found the perfect place God prepared for them. And meanwhile, the Wampanoag tribe, okay, and Massasoit is the military leader of this tribe. His entire tribe has been pretty much wiped out. That was 5 years kind of before the Pilgrims ever arrived. They're a very small tribe. They saw these, Pilgrims come in and move in on a ghost town of their own debt. Okay, the Wampanoag tribe. So, yeah, this was not a peaceful world. Okay, it wasn't like they landed and then the Native Americans were smiling. You could imagine how the Wampanoag tribe felt about them settling in this abandoned town. Nobody lived there. Okay, so no fault. That's no fault of the Pilgrims. Nobody lived there. Nobody had claim over the land. People were dead. This was just rock and trees and elements, and they survived miraculously. Probably about half of them survived, and they survived this brutal winter, and now that winter's over, what does Massasoit do? Okay, of the Wampanoag tribe. He sees these white people come in, move in. You could imagine he's not very happy about that. Massasoit was also staring down the barrel of annihilation. Like I said, 5 years before the Pilgrims even came, his whole tribe was pretty much wiped out. So he was gonna be gone. His whole tribe is everything that he's worked for gone. Because to the west of this tribe, this Wampanoag tribe, there was the Narragansett. Sorry, this is another tribe. Okay, to the west of the Wampanoag tribe, and they were longtime enemies of the Wampanoag, and they were touched by disease, but not to the extent that Wampanoag was. They were patiently awaiting, really, an opportunity to go in and war with this Wampanoag tribe, the Narragansett tribe. And I mean, it's incredible. The one thing, they knew some agriculture, they knew some hunting tactics, but there was nothing the Native American people knew more than human sacrifice and war. There was actually, this is fascinating. I was reading about Native Americans and some of their war tactics. What they would do when you're riding a horse, you can kind of like wrap your legs around the neck of the horse, and they would like go upside down and shoot bow and arrows and use the horse's face pretty much as a shield. I'll have to get you a picture because I'm not like describing it well. But that's like, could you imagine the strength and I mean, the ability to fight? I mean, that's one thing the Native Americans had. Okay, so anyway, this warring tribe to the west of the Wampanoag tribe, they're going to come in at any moment. Okay, and Massasoit knows that. He's a military leader, a political strategist. So he feared complete destruction. Now, he made a choice that no other Native American leader probably would have made. Like I said, they were good at a couple of things. One being, hunting, some agriculture practices, human sacrifice, and war. So they could have, even with their small numbers, Massasoit and the Wampanoag tribe, they could have gone in easy and wiped out those 20 Pilgrims or whatever was left after that brutal winter. But they said, Massasoit said to himself, I'm going to let them stay. Now, why? Why would Massasoit, this military leader, capable of wiping out these white people who moved in pretty much on a grave of his people, why would he let them survive? Well, I'll tell you, he needed allies, okay? Because these goofy, awkward, bearded Europeans had something the Native Americans valued. And it's been documented. I mean, the Native Americans thought that their hair was like straw. They described their eyes as tiny. They were pretty racist. Okay. The Native American people, they thought they were goofy, awkward, and this has been documented. But there was one thing that the Native Americans really valued, and that was the Pilgrim stuff. Okay, the copper kettles that they brought over. They brought over glass beads and steel knives, metal tools. And to quote Charles Mann out of his book, he says, letting the Europeans stay was like discovering a dingy kiosk that traded, expensive electronics in exchange for your old socks. So the Pilgrims really needed agriculture practices. They really needed hunting skills and beaver fur because they were dying and they needed the necessities. They had all of this, the copper kettles and, things that weren't necessary for survival. I mean, you can, argue that a copper kettle comes in handy, but they weren't great at survival. They had all this cool stuff, but they didn't have the basics. Okay. So what would happen would be the Native Americans would come in with, some fur, and they'd do some trading. They'd trade some fur for, some nice big metal tools or steel knives. And they were pretty much getting like an iPhone for old socks. Okay. So that was the way the trade kind of went down, and why Massasoit really wanted them to stay, because a lot of that stuff could help them in war with the Western tribe that was eyeing them down and looking to completely annihilate them. So the natives didn't applaud the Europeans. They tolerated the Europeans because they were convenient. The Pilgrims, they were convenient and they needed allies. So this is the real New England. Okay. This was not peaceful. It was not kumbaya. It was political. It was strategic. Okay. So Massasoit needed help, but he didn't trust the Pilgrims. Okay. And the Pilgrims didn't trust him either. So what he did, Massasoit, he sent 2 interpreters to their settlement. Okay. The first one was Samoset. Okay. He was trustworthy. The second interpreter is the guy you might have heard from your history books. His name was Tisquantum, also known as Squanto. Okay. And this is where the American textbooks kind of skip over the truth or blatantly omit the truth. Squanto was not a loyal friend to the Pilgrims from the beginning. We're told in our American textbooks that Squanto was a nice Native American, smiling Native American who taught them to plant corn and taught them how to plant food. Okay, he was not a loyal friend of the Pilgrims. He was a very screwed up, broken man. Okay, this guy was carrying trauma, the trauma of loss none of us could have imagined. Only few of us could probably imagine the type of loss and trauma that this guy has gone through. So to Squanto, a little bit of his backstory because it's important. He was captured by some British sailors. Okay, so after Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, that really sparked a lot of explorers coming over here. Christopher Columbus really came to spread the gospel and Christianity. That was in a primary motive of Christopher Columbus. Later, he was directed by Spain to come here and, gold and open up the trade and things like that. But a lot of people were coming over here, explorers, and Tisquantum was kidnapped. Okay, and he was dragged across the ocean and he was sold into slavery in Spain. Okay, so 7 years before the first Thanksgiving, and I'm going to get to the first Thanksgiving here, he was captured. Okay, let that sink in. Squanto was a slave before he ever met the Pilgrims. Okay, and then he was eventually freed by white people, captured probably by the Spanish, the British sailors, sold by those British sailors into Spanish slavery in Spain. Okay. Then he was eventually freed by Roman Catholic priests. So he made his way to London and he was freed by these priests made his way to London, and he kind of lived as a conversational piece with an Englishman. So it wasn't exactly slavery. He made his way to London, and it was sort of like, I don't know how you would call it, a an agreement where he learned English, and eventually he secured a passage back to North America. Okay, lived with a wealthy Englishman, and the wealthy Englishman who had Squanto, he like lived as a conversational piece in his home. It was probably like a semi servant type deal. In exchange, he learned English, and then he went back to North America, where his tribe was, right? And when he returned, he found that every single person in the Patuxet tribe, okay, was dead. Okay, Charles Mann described this in his book as a cemetery 200 miles long. Patuxet was the hardest hit. Like I said, disease, famine. This was 5 years before the Pilgrims ever came. Okay, to Squanto, had gotten back to North America and found his entire family had died. And he returned to a world where his culture, his family, his relationships, everything had been annihilated. So he went to the Wampanoag tribe out of pure survival. And he went to Massasoit for survival. Now, Massasoit didn't trust him. And, usually in a situation like that where you approach a military leader of a Native American tribe and you are of a separate Native American tribe, particularly one that was annihilated, it was odd that Massasoit had welcomed him into the tribe. Now, he didn't trust him. So he actually enslaved Squanto, something close to house arrest, but he wanted to keep Squanto around because he thought it was fascinating that he spoke English. So this is the tragedy of Squanto. We don't hear about his trauma in school, and really it's because his trauma led to him being a complete dirtbag. Okay, which is the case. This is human tragedy. This is the human tragedy behind the Thanksgiving myth, that Squanto was like a smiling face. No, he hated his life. He was a slave in his own Native American tribe that he had to flee to survive with Massasoit. And yeah, he was not a happy fella. And typically, unhappy fellas do bad things. Okay, so this was a guy who was rejected by both worlds. Okay, he was sold into slavery by these British sailors in Spain, and then eventually the Roman Catholic priests freed him, and then eventually he made it back to North America, and he's just trying to find purpose here in the ashes of his life. Okay, I took a little detour from our boy, or to our boy Squanto. Now, on November 22nd, 1621, Samoset and Squanto, they entered the Pilgrims' village. Okay, and they talked for about an hour. Now, he had decided to let them stay, the Pilgrims, Massasoit, but he didn't trust the Pilgrims. He didn't go in there right away and kill them all. He had sent the two interpreters, Samoset and to Squanto, to go speak with the colonists, and they spoke for about an hour. Okay, and I don't know, and this is where history kind of gets blurry. This happens. I don't know exactly what happened with the interpreters and the Wampanoag tribe in Massasoit. Okay, he definitely needed allies, and he wanted the Pilgrims to stay. Now, I don't know if the two interpreters here, Squanto and Samoset, had given some sort of signal or something, but ultimately what happened was insane. Massasoit, I don't know if he had a prearranged schedule and he was planning to attack in some sort of way, take over the camp and take the Pilgrims and, force an allyship. That's what I'm thinking happened here, was this force of an alliance to happen, because he had decided he wanted them to stay. That's why he sent the interpreters. And I don't know if they were negotiating and then something, went astray in the negotiations, and then Tisquantum and Samoset signaled. But in any case, Massasoit and the rest of the Native American party, the Wampanoag tribe, Indian tribe, they appeared at the crest of the hill without warning. They did not tell the Pilgrims they were going to fight. They appeared at the crest of the hill on the south bank of the creek, and it ran through the Pilgrims' camp. Okay, this creek ran through the Pilgrims' camp. Now, alarmed, of course, by this sudden entrance, they were just talking with interpreters and trying to negotiate some sort of alliance. Okay. And then all of a sudden, who's that? Oh, it's the Native Americans. They're coming in and they're attacking us. They're coming in from the south bank of this creek at the crest of the hill here, and the Europeans, the Pilgrims, they withdrew, to the hill on the opposite side of the bank. And then they had a few cannons, okay, and they launched some cannons behind this like half-finished stockade, and that is where a battle ensued. The standoff ensued. And then suddenly Massasoit and his warriors appeared on a hill above the camp. Okay. The Pilgrims withdrew behind their half-built stockade, and they started cannons and blah, blah, blah. So there's like this fight going on. Okay. And the fight ended with a guy named Edward Winslow. If you guys can pull out your, notepad, if the kids are listening this morning, happy Thanksgiving to y'all. Edward Winslow is the guy who ended this all, this little skirmish. And by skirmish, I mean there were cannons and people dying. Okay. So Edward Winslow would actually later become the governor of the Plymouth colony. Like I said, it used to be the Patuxet tribe that lived there, wiped out. They named it, the Pilgrim settlers, New Plymouth. So Edward Winslow would later become governor, but he waded through this creek, and he was in full armor, carrying a sword, and through Squanto, the interpreter, he offered himself as hostage. So he was telling Squanto in English, hey, I want to be offered as hostage. Just stop the battle. So Massasoit accepted this, Edward Winslow, as a hostage, and with Squanto and about 20 of his men, they crossed over the creek into the Pilgrim settlement, and they stopped warring with the Pilgrims at this point. Okay, so this kind of put an end to it, the hostage deal. Thus, there was a historic meeting that took place, and there were some negotiations, and there was an alliance agreement, and a great Thanksgiving feast, because that is what happened after war. Men get hungry, okay, and they would eat. Okay, so there was a historic meeting, but this only happened after the hostage deal took place with Edward Winslow. So this was not peaceful. Okay, this was nearly a shootout to the death. There was one act, and that was the act of Edward Winslow offering himself up as tribute. I volunteer as tribute. He offered himself up, and that prevented a full-blown war and opened up a door to negotiations. And eventually that negotiation led to an alliance. But remember, this alliance was not sentimental. Okay, this was political. It was a hard-fought alliance. People died. Okay, Massasoit needed the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims did also need Massasoit. Like I said, they had all this armor and weaponry and, kettles, pots and things. But they didn't have the basics down. They didn't have the agricultural practices down, the fur, the beavers, the hunting practices. So this piece was practical. and they needed each other. But if you ask me, I mean, that was kind of a shady move by Massasoit. He sent his interpreters there to go negotiate, and then all of a sudden he comes up over the crest of the hill, warring. Like I said, the Native Americans were good at a few things: human sacrifice, agricultural and hunting practices, and warring. Okay, so the plot thickens here. And I'm sure your school teachers never told you this. Squanto here had a plan. So this is after the Thanksgiving feast. And the negotiations led to an alliance. So they're, pals-ish now. Okay, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe. But Squanto had a plan, and he had a big one. He wanted to rebuild the Patuxet people. He wanted to rise to power. He believed that he could manipulate both the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe into getting him into manipulate them into allowing him to rise to power above Massasoit. Okay, he wanted to be the leader of it all, and he wanted to rebuild the Patuxet people. So in 1622, a year after the whole war and the negotiations kind of happened, Squanto told the Pilgrims that Massasoit, was planning to betray them and their negotiations. And Squanto had actually said that, that Western tribe, the Narragansett, I think I'm saying that wrong, but it was that Western tribe, an enemy of the Wampanoag tribe. Squanto came up with a lie, I think. I wasn't there, but he came up with a lie that Massasoit was going to team up with this enemy tribe and take out all the Pilgrims. Okay, and he tried to provoke the Pilgrims into attacking Massasoit. You see what Squanto was doing here. He was manipulating both sides. So he tried to provoke the Pilgrims. And this is where you start to see that peace that they came to. And that peace wasn't really exactly strong in the first place, because it started out with them sending interpreters, and then all of a sudden war, almost a full-blown war breaking out. And then the Pilgrims having to offer a hostage in order just to have some talks here. This peace was fragile. And this is where you start to see that fragile piece start to crack and cave in. So smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to y'all. Oh, you guys are the best. We're going to be right back. I'm going to take a quick break, but you're listening to Conservative Cat. We are digging into the true story. The revisionist history teachers will not tell you this. The true story of Thanksgiving. I'll be back.
Sometimes God stops you cold, not with a whisper, with a punch to the soul. Saul wasn't looking for Jesus. He was hunting Christians. He had power, position, and a mission. Then God knocked him to the dirt, a light from heaven, a voice that knew his name. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? That moment wasn't soft. It wasn't sweet. It was a spiritual ambush. God still works like that. He steps into your mess, interrupts your pride, confronts the man you've become when you're wandered too far. Maybe you're building your own kingdom. Maybe your fists are up, fighting battles God never called you to, or maybe you're just running hard in the wrong direction. But then comes the voice, clear, heavy, holy. Why are you persecuting me? Jesus doesn't want your behavior fixed. He wants your heart surrendered. Saul didn't get a lecture. He got a mission. Get up, go to the city. You'll be told what to do. That's the way of real manhood in the kingdom. Surrender first, then orders. You don't need every answer right now. You need to obey the voice. Follow the light. Rise up off the dirt and walk the road God lays out it for you. Some roads break you to rebuild you, and that's exactly what Jesus wants. You want to train like a warrior? You need fuel like one. Patriot Pump is clean, powerful pre-workout that won't let you quit halfway. Just like the mission God gives you, it's not about the hype. It's about the grit. Fuel up, lock in, get after it.
Hey, go ahead and smash that like button, share this out with your friends. I so do appreciate you being here. Subscribe to the channel. Happy Thanksgiving. I do this every year. I like to tell you about the true story of Thanksgiving because I was never told the true story. I had to do all this research myself. I read Charles Mann's book, 1491. It was a great book, great read. And I had to do all this digging myself. We shouldn't be doing this to our children, telling them this revisionist history that the Native Americans swooped in and saved the Pilgrims. That is not at all how it happened. We were just talking about Massasoit and the Narragansett tribe and them coming together and betraying the Pilgrims after the negotiations, which wasn't true. This was completely fabricated by Squanto because Squanto believed that he could rise up in power and elevate himself above Massasoit. After these negotiations happened after this battle, they came together for a Thanksgiving feast, which was very common after wartime, where men would get together and eat after war. That's just what would happen. Okay. And this act of war was sort of, out of nowhere. They sent interpreters. The Wampanoag tribe at the direction of Massasoit. Squanto was an enslaved member of the Wampanoag tribe, and he sent his interpreters there to go talk to him. But then all of a sudden, there was like an ambush. So I think you're up to speed. But Squanto, tried to provoke the Pilgrims into attacking Massasoit and the Wampanoag tribe, and tried to get them to believe that they were going to betray the negotiations. So this was a very fragile peace. Squanto's plan here failed. Thank God. Okay. But when Massasoit found out that Squanto was trying to pit the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe against each other, Massasoit demanded Squanto be handed over for execution. So at this time, there was negotiations. Squanto, I'd imagine, was given to the Pilgrims for help to try to get the Pilgrims, to a place where they had good agriculture and hunting practices. And that's true. Some of that's true, what you're taught in grade school about Squanto helping the Pilgrims. It was all part of negotiations after a full-blown battle happened. But the Pilgrims refused. Okay. They did not want Squanto to be handed over to Massasoit for execution. Don't know why, but it was probably their faith that had something to do with it. They didn't want to see Squanto die. Probably saw that Squanto was a very broken man. We kind of went into Squanto's background a little bit. He was sold off into slavery to the Spanish by British sailors who were there prior to the Pilgrims. And eventually, Roman Catholic priests bought his freedom. Then he made his way to London, lived with an Englishman, learned English, came back to North America, found out his entire family was wiped out. He was very upset, very broken. So I'm imagining here that the Pilgrims refused to give Squanto over because they saw that Squanto was a broken man. In their faith, they were devoutly religious people. We established that earlier, the Pilgrims. Their faith is what ultimately showed Squanto mercy. But Massasoit, he wasn't a Christian. Okay. He was not very happy that he wanted Squanto to die. And he wasn't happy with the Pilgrims. And right then and there, he cut off trade with the Pilgrims because he wouldn't give them Squanto, or him Squanto. He wanted Squanto to die. And really, the cutoff of trade, it led to the colony dealing with, starvation. And Squanto essentially was under Pilgrim guard from then on. Okay, he died, shortly after this whole ordeal where he wasn't given up for execution during a diplomatic mission. So this is a very complex, tragic figure, Squanto. Okay. He is definitely more human than the revisionist school teachers make him out to be. He is not a cartoonish character who is a friend of the Pilgrims. Okay. In fact, his actions here ultimately, and because they saved this guy's life, his actions here ultimately led to this colony starving because they were cut off from trade. They did rely on the Massasoit tribe of the Wampanoag tribe that was led by Massasoit. Same as Massasoit relied on the Pilgrims. This was an alliance that was needed on both sides. So the peace between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims lasted. So eventually he died, and I think that there was some sort of form of peace still. There was just trade, okay, that was cut off. And it kind of led to the Pilgrims, starving. But ultimately, everybody was all right. Okay, they weren't warring with each other. Just was no trade between the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims after the Squanto ordeal. So there was peace for 50 years. Okay, and in 1675, okay, when Massasoit's son launched a war that engulfed all of New England because Massasoit's son was a dirtbag. Okay, he launched a war, engulfed all of New England, and who won ultimately in this war was the Europeans. Not because, the Europeans were superior, but because there was a lot of disease that devastated the Native American populations. And that's ultimately what won this war. Like what faction was going to die first from the diseases? Okay. And as I told you before, the Native Americans, they weren't exactly the most hygienic. European culture these were Christians. Okay. Pilgrims. They liked cheese and wooden shoes. Okay. They weren't about human sacrifices, eating each other, bleeding out, for the sun gods. Not very hygienic. I'm not shocked to find out that the Native American populations died before the Europeans in this war, really launched by Massasoit's son, who's a complete dirtbag. I'm not surprised to find out that the Native Americans lost because of their, I'd imagine they weren't exactly hygienic. So the Narragansett, keep messing that word up. It's a tribe. It's that western tribe that was an enemy of the Wampanoag tribe. They were wiped out. Okay. They were pretty much untouched. Like I said, they were eyeing down the Wampanoag tribe and they were wanting to annihilate that tribe. But Massasoit teamed up with Pilgrims, and Massasoit kind of saved his people. Not a fan of Massasoit because he did this ambush, right, against the Pilgrims. And I mean, that was kind of a dirtbag move. And then also he called for Squanto's head. And when the Pilgrims said, no, we don't want to, he cut off trade, which was kind of a dirtbag move. Not very merciful guy. Okay. Or fair guy, I would say, Massasoit. But at least he saved his tribe for 50 years by pairing up with the Pilgrims and coming to some sort of negotiations, even though coming to those negotiations was kind of like disgusting, and how he like ambushed and yeah. But ultimately there was peace between the two, and I think that's what led to the long-term survival of his tribe and the long-term survival of the Pilgrims, because they reached those negotiations. But this Western tribe, the enemy of the Wampanoag tribe, they were much better off than the Wampanoag tribe. They got wiped out by a smallpox epidemic in 1633. Okay, so a lot of these natives were dying off because of diseases. It wasn't that the Europeans were like superior in war, which I've already talked about. Native Americans love a few things. War is one of them. But it was more so the disease that killed them off. And like I said, the war was started by Massasoit's son, and he broke 50 years of peace with the Pilgrims. Okay, and their societies, the Native American societies, were destroyed by diseases. They didn't understand the diseases. They couldn't fight the diseases. And it was a real tragedy and a collapse, really, of the Native American people. So here's what we know. A bit of review for you, if you will. The Pilgrims survived, I think, miraculously after that brutal first winter. I don't know how you look at that brutal first winter before spring came and before these kind of negotiations really happened with the Wampanoag tribe. They survived this brutal winter, and I don't know how they did it without the hunting practices and agricultural practices worked out in these negotiations with the Wampanoag tribe in exchange for things like what we would say is an iPhone today. Okay. Kettle pots, knives, metal tools. That's what the Wampanoag tribe got in exchange. But it was a miracle that these Pilgrims survived that first brutal winter. And really, I think it was God's divine hand over their lives. And he wanted Christianity to be brought to the West. He wanted these Pilgrims to survive. And they did. Ultimately, they came out at the end of that war started by Massasoit's son 50 years after peace with the Native American tribes. They came out victorious, and a lot of the Native Americans were wiped out. Not because the Europeans were better fighters, definitely not. But they arrived, the Pilgrims, to a land that was kind of ravaged by plagues anyway. And that is what ultimately led to the Wampanoag tribe needing this alliance with the Pilgrims, because this Wampanoag tribe was on the verge of extinction, much like the Patuxet tribe that was there, where the Pilgrims had renamed the Patuxet area to New Plymouth. That was just a cemetery that the Pilgrims had kind of taken, made camp on. It was a cemetery, and Massasoit had some wisdom and paired up with the Pilgrims rather than completely annihilating them. He realized, okay, in order for me to keep my people alive, I'm going to have to come to some sort of alliance with these people, with these straw-haired, blue-eyed, wooden shoes, cheese-eating people. Okay, so the Pilgrims, they walked into a political battlefield that they didn't really understand. And they were manipulated. They were nearly attacked and killed. Then they were nearly starved after they wouldn't give up Squanto in this execution deal, because Massasoit wanted him executed for his betrayal. They were nearly destroyed, these Pilgrims, on multiple occasions. Okay, that first battle that ultimately led to the Thanksgiving feast. Then they were nearly starved because Squanto screwed the pooch, and he screwed up this deal that they had, and they cut off trade, the Wampanoag tribe, with the Pilgrims. They nearly starved, and then they were nearly destroyed by Massasoit's son, who started a full-blown war in New England with multiple tribes and English settlers. Like, it wasn't just Native Americans against white people. It was Native American against Native American against white people, and white people against Native Americans. Like, this was truly divine that these people ultimately came out victorious. They weren't saved by multiculturalism, which is what your history teacher probably taught you, that, oh, this was a different culture the Native Americans had, and they used each other's cultures to help each other survive. No, this was not like utopian multiculturalism at work here. Okay. Ultimately, what happened was there was bloodshed, a war, negotiations. There was a covenant made. There was an alliance forged under duress. And ultimately, Edward Winslow had to offer himself up as a hostage in order to even get those negotiations going. That's the truth. It wasn't a kumbaya moment where everybody, came together and talked about their cultures. Okay, so the Pilgrims weren't saved by multiculturalism. The Native Americans weren't really saved by multiculturalism. They were saved simply because they teamed up with the Pilgrims, and the Pilgrims offered, iPhones for, old socks. Okay. And they benefited from trade just as much as we benefited from the trade. So Thanksgiving is not a cartoon. It is not a Hallmark moment. It is not a kumbaya moment or a festival, a kumbaya festival. No, this is a story of Western civilization arriving in a world already in collapse. I mean, the Patuxet tribe was completely wiped out, which is why Squanto's backstory is so tragic and sad. He was sold into slavery, came back home. Ultimately, the Roman Catholic priest bought his freedom. Then he came back home, learned English, came to North America again, and then saw his whole entire family wiped out. And then that ultimately led to a shaky peace deal, or, well, there was those negotiations, and Squanto, because he was a broken man, betrayed Massasoit and the Pilgrims, and ultimately Massasoit wanted his head. The Pilgrims said no because they were faithful people. So, it was fascinating to read about all of this in Charles Mann's book, 1491. Check it out. It's good. And it was really a story of Western civilization arriving in a world that was already in collapse and finding its way through danger by faith. Okay. So it is a story of God guiding this tiny little band of religious refugees. Okay. And really, it was a political chess match between the Native Americans and Pilgrims. This was a story of betrayal, bravery, and survival. Two civilizations crashing into one another, a fragile moment of cooperation before a century of conflict. It was messy. It was very real. It was very human. This was not a cartoon. This was not multiculturalism. And I think that the true story of Thanksgiving deserves to be told truthfully. Okay, not through the lens of modern ideology. Multiculturalism is great, okay, and helps everybody. That is not what ultimately saved the Pilgrims from starvation and death. And that's not what saved the Native Americans from death and starvation. And ultimately, they did die from starvation and death because Massasoit's son screwed it all up. But it wasn't just the Native Americans teaching the Pilgrims how to plant corn, how to fish, and how to hunt. Okay, this was a colony that prospered only because of these trade deals that happened, and there was a negotiation and war, and blood was shed. And like I said, the Native Americans knew a few things. One of the things was war, and that negotiation, that covenant, was so strong that Massasoit didn't even really break the covenant when the Pilgrims didn't give up Squanto for execution for his betrayal. The the Native Americans kept that peace for 50 years, and then Massasoit's son came in and warred with everybody, and ultimately entered into a war that he couldn't win because the Native Americans succumbed to disease and wiped them all out, and the Europeans were victorious in that war, not because they were superior in battle, but because disease got to the Native Americans first. Now, like I said, schools usually stop at the part where, Squanto helped, the Pilgrims plant corn and help the Pilgrims fish and hunt, which was part of the negotiations, and I'm sure Squanto did that right before he betrayed both sides and wanted to rise to power and rebuild the Patuxet tribe because he was bitter in his heart and he was a broken man. Now, they did all of that, but that's not ultimately what made the colony prosper. Okay, not even really the trades. Like the trade, yes, the Pilgrims helped the Native Americans, and the Native Americans helped us. And there was these trade deals that were happening in this peace negotiation that lasted 50 years. Okay, but what really ultimately, I think, saved the Pilgrims was this. And this is where the story kind of gets deeper. I've told you about the Indians and the Pilgrims, and I kind of debunked a lot of these myths, these Thanksgiving myths, told you the true history. Now I want to get into what the Pilgrims kind of realized for themselves, and maybe this led to them ultimately winning the war against Massasoit's son. Some of this might have played a part. Like I said, it was disease that mainly wiped out the Native American tribes. It wasn't that the Europeans were better at war. But this could have at least helped them during that wartime. It was like a century of war. So, let me dig into this. The Pilgrims, they came to America and they were backed by, I told you they came on the Mayflower. And this part of the history rarely gets told. They came to America and they were backed by financial sponsors in England and Holland. Okay, I told you that for 11 years, the separatists, the Pilgrims, left the Church of England. They went to Holland. And who backed the Pilgrims and their trip and kind of sponsored their trip on the Mayflower? It was financial sponsors from England, largely, and it wasn't just the Pilgrims that were on that ship. Like I said, it was 120 people. And you had 40 Pilgrims, and they mainly lived in Holland for like 11 years before they decided to go to the New World. Okay, as part of the agreement, everything that the settlers produced. So I'm talking about the Pilgrims here. This was a very small part of it all. The other of the 120 out of what was it? 60 plus 20, 80. The other 80, they went off and kind of settled in their own little plot of land, not in New Plymouth. I'm talking about the Pilgrims. So the settler Pilgrims, they, as part of the financial agreement, they were probably backed by financial sponsors in Holland. They had to produce everything that they produced had to go into what was called a common storehouse. Okay, so now you're starting to see why the Pilgrims kind of, like half of them died by the first winter. They still struggled even when there was that trade cut off after the Squanto execution deal. They were starving because the trade cut off. But the settlers ultimately figured it out. And, but the common storehouse, here's how it worked. Land, houses, crops, all of it belonged to community, and each person had to receive an equal share. No one owned private property in this new little colony, New Plymouth. Okay, and this is how the Mayflower Compact kind of laid it out and why it was a little flawed. Okay, it was essentially a commune. The colony was living on a commune, and it was the early form of collectivism. And I don't think that we needed the negotiations really with the Native Americans. The Pilgrims didn't need the the negotiations with the Native Americans had they figured this out earlier. Okay, that collectivism does not work. So Governor William Bradford, like I said, he was the leader of the Pilgrims on the Mayflower. He eventually realized that this system was failing, the collectivism system, where they would, were sponsored by these financial sponsored by these financial sponsors in Holland. And then they essentially had to produce everything they produced went to a common storehouse, land, houses, crops, and nobody really owned anything. And Bradford said, well, this is failing. Okay, with no personal ownership, there was no motivation to work. The strongest and most capable men saw no reason to labor, and they didn't want to labor for the benefit of others without reward. Okay, and resentment sort of grew out of this system of common storehouse is, what it was kind of called. They produced everything and then it all went to the commune. Okay, nobody really had their own thing. And very capable men didn't want to work as hard as, the non-capable men, or, there was no real incentive to work for the benefit of others without a reward for themselves. So Bradford described the result as confusion, discontent, and a sharp decline in productivity. Okay, so the first harsh winter that they had really killed off the almost the whole colony. It was half the colony. And collectivism just kept making things worse. Okay. So Bradford, he actually scrapped this whole system. So I told you about the relationships with the Indians and everything like that, and the Pilgrims. But this is a part of the story that rarely gets told, and it's so important because before socialism was even a word, Bradford realized how bad socialism actually is and how socialism sucks, and he scrapped the whole system. And what Bradford did, William Bradford, he assigned each family in this New Plymouth, what was known as Patuxent, he assigned each family their own plot of land, their private property, and allowed them to manage it as they wished. Okay, suddenly you had productivity exploding, and people worked harder, they planted more, and prosperity really took hold. And this idea really didn't manifest to its fullness until that deal with Squanto kind of happened, where they refused to give Squanto over for execution to Massasoit, and then they cut off trade. Okay, the Wampanoag tribe, and they were starting to starve. The Pilgrim settlers. And why was that? Because socialism causes people to starve. And this whole thing of collectivism, because it results in a sharp decline of productivity. So Bradford, he scrapped it. And people started to work harder. They started to plant more. And prosperity started to really take hold. And Bradford wrote that the change, quote, made all hands industrious. So producing far more food than ever. So in essence, the Pilgrims discovered long before the word socialism ever existed that socialism fails and that individual incentive and private property creates success. And, some argue that that's what led to the European settlers' victory, with the Massasoit son. He launched a war all along New England, included Native American against Native American, the European against Native American, European. The Europeans ultimately lived out of that war, and the Native Americans died. And it was largely due to diseases. Like I said, the smallpox epidemic wiped out the entire Narragansett tribe, which was once a powerful tribe, more powerful than Wampanoag, and was, strong in the 1620s. But some would argue that the Pilgrims discovering that socialism sucks actually is what led to their victory, because they were able to, and the Native Americans were also operating on a commune socialism type level, like Massasoit. Like, come on now, folks, he was probably requiring all of the resources be brought to his tent, and then he'd divvy it out. That's how collectivism kind of works. And that's what the Pilgrims were doing, but they abandoned that under William Bradford's leadership. And they discovered that private property creates success. Individual incentive creates success. Okay, so this new prosperity allowed them to trade with the native tribes and to pay off their debts to the financial backers. Okay, or allowed them to not rely on that trade with the native tribes. So with that whole Squanto deal, where they wanted, or Massasoit wanted Squanto for execution, and the Pilgrims said, nah, we're not doing that, because, I think they were convicted people. They cut off trade, the native tribes, and the Pilgrims were self-sustaining, or ultimately became self-sustaining, because they adopted something that worked. Capitalism, private property, individual incentive. And then they were ultimately able to pay off their debts to the financial backers. And word spread across Europe about the thriving Plymouth colony, sparking what was called the Great Puritan Migration. Okay, so none of this really diminishes what happened between the Wampanoag tribe and the Pilgrims, and the trade and the negotiations, and they did help each other. It wasn't through multiculturalism that saved both of these groups of peoples, these two different peoples. It wasn't that. It was bloodshed, war, negotiations. That's all what led to this contract, and they were able to trade with each other. And I'm not trying to diminish that. But ultimately, what led to the long-term, or the longevity of the European people, of the Pilgrims, was this switch from collectivism to individualism. That is ultimately what saved and set apart from the Native Americans, the Europeans, and why they were ultimately victorious when Massasoit's son began warring with all of these various tribes, okay, and the Europeans. Okay, so yes, the Native Americans played a crucial role. Squanto helping plant corn. Sure, he did that right before he betrayed everybody and kind of disturbed the peace that was struck after this big war happened in the Thanksgiving feast. Not diminishing any of that. That is a really cool part of history. But I think that this is even cooler. The Pilgrims realized we don't need the Native Americans. They just cut off trade because we wouldn't give them Squanto for execution. How are we going to do this on our own? And they figured it out. So Squanto, like I said, he was captured, sold into slavery, freed, taken to England, learned English, eventually returned to the New World. He taught the Pilgrims very essential survival skills. Due to this contract that was reached after this battle that happened, that Massasoit launched against the Wampanoag tribe, launched against the Pilgrims, and sort of an ambush. But he taught them survival skills, Squanto, and he helped them negotiate peace. As an interpreter, he didn't do that out of the kindness of his heart. He was told to do that by Massasoit and the Wampanoag tribe, because remember, Squanto was imprisoned and was a slave to Massasoit, okay, because he didn't trust him. But he wanted him around because he spoke English. He thought that was kind of cool. And the Pilgrims believed, Squanto, many people believed at that time, the Pilgrims thought Squanto was brought to them by God, which is part of the reason why they didn't want to give them up for execution. And they were grateful to Squanto and the Wampanoag tribe, and they still had peace even after the whole, like, we're not giving Squanto up for execution deal. They had peace for 50 years prior to Massasoit's son rising to power. But I would really argue that the prosperity that the colony experienced maybe wasn't so much that, and was maybe more them abandoning the collectivism and getting productivity up through individualism. Okay. So I think it really came from abandoning collectivism and embracing private property, personal responsibility, and individual incentive. And that's ultimately what made the Pilgrims thrive. And the longevity of the Pilgrims' prosperity. I would make that argument. So this is much more deeper than maybe your school teacher ever taught you. This is often the forgotten story of Thanksgiving. This is a religious people. They came to the New World fleeing religious persecution. They weren't doing it right. They were dying off. They teamed up with Massasoit and the Wampanoag tribe, the Pilgrims. That was sort of a mess. And then ultimately, they discovered what real freedom is. It's personal enterprise. It is not communal ownership. Communal ownership does not create abundance. Personal enterprise creates abundance. So the Pilgrims didn't come for conquest. Okay? They came here to worship freely. They built a new world. And they thanked God. They truly thanked him for saving them from famine, from war, from disease, from betrayal, from death. And Thanksgiving is not about pretending everything is peaceful and that multiculturalism works. That's what bothers me about it. It's like, this was not about multiculturalism at all. And this is about giving thanks even when the world isn't peaceful. And when you're kind of waiting in the hallway for God to move. And I truly believe William Bradford, the governor of New Plymouth, that was a God move in his heart, where he said, enough with this collectivism. We're going to do it our way now. We're not going to rely on the trade with the Native Americans. And I think that deal where they said, okay, we're going to stand by our faith and we're not going to give up Squanto, because Squanto has kind of helped us through this negotiation time, through this peace deal. We don't want to give you Squanto Massasoit because we know you're going to kill him, and we don't want that. And Massasoit cut off trade, and that kind of, led to a starvation. And I think in that period of tragedy, I mean, there was still peace between the Wampanoag tribe, Massasoit, and the Pilgrims. I think that is ultimately what led them to say, let's get our heads out of our butts, okay, and abandon collectivism and do it for ourselves. And it's kind of like praising God in the hallway. They gave thanks even though everything looked dull and glum. And they were praising God in the hallway and giving him gratitude in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of danger. And the faith is really what I think led to, and this belief in individualism and true freedom, which is biblical. I think that's ultimately what led to this victorious European Western civilization we know today. Okay. So that's the real story, folks. That's the conservative cat story. And this is the story that America needs today. So do me a favor, this Thanksgiving, share this out with one friend and tell them to subscribe to the Conservative Cat channel, because this is a thing that our school children are not learning in school, and they need to know the real story, because it's much more complex than, a cartoon character Squanto helping the Pilgrims plant corn. Okay. It's much more complex. And I think if you told kids the real story, they'd be able to handle it. I think often we try to tell kids, revisionist history because we don't think that they can handle stories of war or the truth. And, that's not doing our kids any favors. So subscribe, enjoy the rest of your day. I am so thankful for you. I can't even begin to thank you for the subscribing and for the support of the program through patriotpumpenergy.com, promo code conservative cat, the super chats. I can't even begin to express my gratitude for your faithful viewership. And I appreciate it. We're just trying to be a voice for the voiceless here at the Conservative Cat Show and try to provide you the truth. I appreciate it. Have a great day.